Welcome to the Flightcast, a place where opinions aren't right or wrong, and where we can agree or disagree about movies, TV, and other assorted media because it's all subjective. My name is Ray. Thank you so much for joining me. Today, I'm just going to let you know up front that we're going to talk a little bit more box office and the group of people that just will not let the DCEU die. And no, I am not talking about the Snyder Cult. But before all of that, I have a massive mea culpa to issue to one of our listeners. But of course, before even diving into that, I want to remind everybody listening to this show that you can listen to it and my other shows at theflightcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts, whether it is Apple Podcasts, whether it is the Flightcast YouTube channel, whether it is Spotify, whether it is Pandora, or whatever your podcatcher is. You can find this show, the main show, every Tuesday. You can find episodes of Flightbox or Flight Alert or whatever show I'm doing in that particular vein on Thursdays. This week it'll be Flightbox because I'm going to do another big catch-up dump on Star Trek Strange New Worlds. There'll be 4 episodes out at that time, and I will binge all 4 of those and talk about that and get caught up on that show. And then there'll be another episode of Flightbox this weekend to talk about Peacemaker Season 2, Episode 2, because that drops on Thursday evenings, which means I got to watch them on Friday, which means I'll review them on Saturday. And then, of course, the feedback show, Flight Chat, which I'm going to reference here in just a little bit. That's on the weekends as well. So you can stay tuned to all of that here at theflightcast.com or, again, wherever you get your podcasts. And I also want to take a moment to thank all of the very loyal supporters of patreon.com/theflightcast. Hope that you've been enjoying all the bonus content. I dropped another episode of Flight Speed yesterday, talking a little bit about what I'm going to talk about today with respect to the people that will not let the DCEU die for the life of me and for the life of any of us, among other things. But, episodes of Flight Speed on Mondays where I do my, pontificating on the way home from work in the car, and then Friday Flight where I recap some stuff that happened in the week and whatnot. And then, of course, bonus episodes of Flight Report, my comic review show, Flight Review, where I review movies and Flight Box as well. I haven't done a Flight Report episode in a long time, but there's a decent amount of comics that I need to read and a decent amount of movies and shows that I need to watch as well. So stay tuned for all of that content, including the animated franchise that I've been teasing for months that I really want to dive into, that I own almost all of at this point through my collecting means and building my library. So I think the very next episode of Flight Review I'm going to do for a Patreon will touch on that finally. So stay tuned for that. Those of you very loyal flight officers who have access to all the bonus content. Flight crew members, if you are one of those who have access to Flight Speed and Friday Flight every Monday and Friday at least. But thank you so much to those of you who support patreon.com/theflightcast. It is very humbling to know that there's people out there that still want to listen to my dulcet tones, even for a nominal fee in these trying economic times. Thank you so much. Hope you enjoy the content. All right, so here's the deal. Before diving into what I'm going to talk about this week, I have to issue a massive apology to Anthony Dorsey. As many of you may know, if you listen to the show regularly and if you listen to Flight Chat regularly, he is the author and the creator of what we call the Dorsey-sized email, which is a long email missive sent by Digital Raven every once in a while where he covers a great deal of things. And most of the time his emails are long. Sometimes they've taken me over an hour to get through because he talks about topics that we spoke of on Flightcast, on Flight Chat, and he also reviews different movies and shows that he's watched recently within the last month or so. And this week's email that he sent a couple of days ago for Flight Chat was a little bit shorter. Actually, it was considerably shorter than some of his other emails, but it was even shorter than that because apparently 2 paragraphs that he sent somehow did not make its way into my vision, and I have no idea how this happened whatsoever. I got into his email, had it open, got through it, talked about all the stuff that he reviewed, and then when I posted the episode, the very next day, he sends me a post on Threads saying that I skipped the 2 paragraphs where he recapped stuff that was going on before he got into his reviews. And I'm like, wait a minute, I was at work when he sent me this message. So I immediately check my phone and I go, what, how could that have possibly happened? I don't know. Some computer glitch, maybe it was a mental error, I have no idea. But either way, I told him that I would read those paragraphs that were missed in that particular email that he sent this past week right now, because he's got some feedback. So this is not totally unorthodox because Flight Chat, of course, used to be the hexagon. It used to be, the feedback used to be a part of the main show. So briefly, I'm going to go through Anthony's feedback just to get him caught up because he said it might be a minute before he sends another email missive. He does, after all, have a job. He is gainfully employed, which again, congratulations to him with respect to that. But here we go. Let's dive in. So what had happened was he had written that note for people who have listened to Flight Chat the other day. He gave a note about please forgive any typos. I use Grammarly to proofread, and they just introduced more AI features and made the whole thing suck now, he says. And then before he got into his reviews, here comes the paragraph. So here's what he said. He said, let's start with feedback from the last email and other flight chats. He said someone made a comparison between Fantastic Four, spoiler, the Doctor Doom tease, and the Headless Superman cameos from the DCEU. Yeah, I don't remember who made that. Was it Alex? Might have been. I'm not sure. He's going to reference Alex here later on. But he said, I think that these are the opposite of each other. The Doctor Doom scene comes as the first MCU appearance of the character and signifies his entrance in the MCU, and RDJ allegedly was in the suit on set, though I personally don't see the need to have seen his face in this scene as it was a perfect tease as is. I tend to agree with that. It's all subjective. He said to contrast this, the multiple Headless Superman scenes came at a time when we had no idea if we would ever see Henry Cavill in the role again, and signified to me his forced exit from the franchise. In short, the Doom scene was a tease for more, and the Superman scenes were disguised slaps in the faces of the fans. I completely agree with that. And it might not have been Alex. I don't remember who it was. Someone did make that comparison. And yeah, I disagree completely. I agree with Anthony on this one. There's a world of difference with respect to context. And was that actually Robert Downey Jr. on set? I mean, perhaps, right? But so what? It would have been like, we're talking a difference of $20 million with respect to, showing his face on camera and or not, at least, or however much they're paying him for Avengers Doomsday. Intriguing. I don't know. But yeah, it's very different because the Headless cameos, and I forget exactly how I responded to this when that email came up, because this was a couple of weeks ago on Flight Chat. But yeah, the Headless cameos, those weren't going anywhere. They were part of an aimless decision-making process, which I'm going to actually talk a little bit about that later on, because that's what I have to talk about with respect to the people that won't let the DCEU die, because there's a name within the DC landscape as far as former executives that a lot of people just either don't know or are conveniently dismissing and forgetting, which I think is an indictment on that individual, but also revisionist history, and we're going to talk about that just in a bit here. But yeah, no, it's not the same. It's not the same at all, because at least we know we're getting Doom. We know Doom is coming. We know Avengers Doomsday is happening. We know he's going to be in that and Secret Wars. Anthony's right. We had no idea if and when we were going to see Henry Cavill ever again with respect to the remains of the DCU. The DCEU, that is. So yeah, I'm with him on that. But here's this second paragraph. This is where he addresses Alex De Silva, like, in particular. He says, on Alex not wanting to sit through the end credits. Yes, because Alex infamously called it a disrespectful, said he was disrespecting his time. Said that James Gunn and the DCU was disrespecting his time by having credit scenes that didn't tease anything, didn't point ahead to anything, didn't have any type of a purpose, which I said, well, credit scenes didn't used to always be that way, and Marvel has groomed us into believing that they should always be that way. And Alex is hardly the only person that was upset about that. A number of other people have expressed discomfort, if not outrage, over that, and I think it's silly, but it's all subjective. But here's what Anthony had to say about it. He said, I want to counter that, or what Alex said about not wanting to sit through the credits. I want to counter that by saying that sitting through the credits inspired me to want to pursue film. Granted, it's been a mostly fruitless journey so far, but I still have hope, he says. Watching through the credits and seeing how many people were involved in a single film showed me that making movies can be a career, even if you only have a small role to play. In addition to that inspiration, he says, a movie I will discuss later in this email, which he did, The Naked Gun, featured clever jokes littered throughout the credits, which were a perfect excuse to sit through the credits to try and catch more, though there was also an end credit scene, but also were a clever trick to get audience members to see the people who worked so hard on the film. All that said, Anthony says if a joke or deleted scene or the other reasons I mentioned isn't enough to get you interested in watching the credits, then don't. It clearly can be an annoyance for some people, and if that's the case, then just leave rather than waiting and leaving with a potential bad taste in your mouth about the movie you just watched. Yeah, and that's essentially what I said to Alex. I said, listen, if that's how, upset and, offended you are, if you're that disrespected by, the credits wasting your time, then yeah, I wouldn't watch any. James Gunn has made it abundantly clear, as far as the DCU is concerned, that he's not going to do the same thing that the MCU has done. He's not going to give us MCU 2.0. His credit scenes in this franchise are not going to be teasers for the next thing. So if that bugs you, don't watch them. Just leave as soon as the credits start. But Anthony, also thank you for like providing an example of exactly what I was also talking to Alex about in terms of people, and I think Alex and others disbelieved me when I said that people actually do sit and watch the credits and do get inspired and are curious, not only whether or not they worked on it, like that one woman I brought up that worked on Superman that waited and like actually took a video of her name in the end credits, the woman that was driving the car that almost got crushed by the building that Superman held up so she could get across the overpass in time. Not just those people, but also anybody like Anthony who is inspired to work on film by looking at all the different jobs, looking at all the VFX artists, looking at all the grips and the gaffers and everybody else on the staff and everybody that's a part of the crew and all the different jobs that are needed in order to make a big budget production like Superman get going in that regard and actually be successful. So yeah, I thank you, Anthony, for providing an actual example of exactly who I'm talking about, because there are plenty of people out there that are inspired or have become inspired to work on film by seeing everybody that's involved in those credits. So and not just everybody involved in terms of the cast and crew, but also the music credits, the location shooting. Hey, that's my hometown, right? Anybody living in Atlanta, anybody living in Georgia, I'm sure has just loved the Marvel movies having the damn pure Georgia logo, right? I get a sense of personal pride myself. And the fact that Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice has a pure Michigan logo on it, that's where I live. It was shot in Detroit, my hometown, right? That's always a point of pride for me. It always will be. So, yeah, plenty of reasons for people to watch the credits, aside from being offended or disrespected of their time, disrespectful of their time, like thinking that, oh, there's just a waste, like they need to point to something. No, they don't. And they didn't always used to. And let's get back to some classic end credit scenes, like before the MCU groomed us into believing everything had to be a point towards, like a teaser for the next thing. So thank you for that, Anthony. Appreciate that. He also said, lastly, for this section, since I got lost in the shuffle of my Superman Fantastic Four email, here's my letterbox linked again if you want to check out my rankings and whatnot. Yeah, I hadn't actually looked at that. Like, I wasn't sure how long the rankings were, because letterbox is something that I haven't, like, I've dabbled in it a little, but I haven't really, like, dove into it. Let's see. So he's got a DCEU ranking, he's got a Star Wars ranking, he's got a comic book ranking. So his comic book movie ranking, he has Man of Steel #1. That's intriguing. So his comic book movie ranking, Man of Steel, it's Zack Snyder dominated. Man of Steel 1, Justice League, Zack Snyder's Justice League, that is, 2, Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice 3, The Dark Knight 4. Oh, I love that. I love the fact that The Dark Knight is behind all of those films. The Dark Knight is an excellent film. I would personally put Batman Begins ahead of it, but I just like the idea that there are those out there, rational individuals like Anthony, and I'm not saying he's rational just because he enjoys the Zack Snyder trilogy, but he is a rational individual that does enjoy the Zack Snyder trilogy, and that is his trifecta, his top 3. Rounding out his top 5 is Spider-Man. Is that Across the Spider-Verse? Yes, that's the sequel, Across the Spider-Verse. We're waiting for the third and final part of that, Beyond the Spider-Verse. He's got the Batman at number 6, Logan 7, Captain America: The First Avenger 8. Oh, wow, he's got it ahead of Winter Soldier. How about that? Into the Spider-Verse number 9, and then Batman Begins rounding out his top 10. Where did he put Superman? He put Superman 12th, which is just behind Spider-Man 2, which he has at 11th. And then behind Superman, he's got Watchmen, Captain America: Winter Soldier, X-Men: First Class, Batman Under the Red Hood. All right, he's including other animation as well. Dredd, not Judge Dredd, but Dredd, the Carl Urban Dredd. First Iron Man film, Spider-Man: Homecoming, and Joker. That's his top 20. How about that? He doesn't get to Avengers Endgame until 25, and he's got Flashpoint Paradox, Death of Superman, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and Wonder Woman ahead of it. I would agree with all of those, except for the 2 animated films that I haven't watched, but will watch at some point. Who knows when? Thunderbolts, yeah, I'd put Thunderbolts a little bit higher. I think it's interesting that he has Infinity War behind Endgame and Thunderbolts. That's intriguing, because I would definitely put Infinity War and also No Way Home higher. But then he's got Wakanda Forever, and the reason I'm going down to 30 is because his 30th film, number 30, is Fantastic Four: First Steps. that's number 30 in his Letterboxd ranking. This is an intriguing ranking, very subjective, definitely very different than my ranking with respect to trying to rank all the comic book films that I've seen. And I have not tried that. I've not tried ranking all of them. He's got, 123 on this list. And of course, I had to look at this. I had to, just to confirm, just to make certain that he sticks to his conviction. At the bottom of his list, number 123 with a bullet, Avengers Age of Ultron. Yep, that is Anthony being consistent. There you go. So yeah, I'll look through the rest of this. Thank you for providing that Letterboxd link. Yeah, I need to maybe. I've been asked a couple of times by people to like do a Letterboxd ranking and to post it. I may do that one of these days because I just, like I said, I've dabbled in it. I probably have an account somewhere, but I've never really, like, I haven't dove headfirst into it like so many others have in that regard. And I have not made any comprehensive lists as of yet, but perhaps I will do that. Might be an easier way to do it than some of the other ways that I do it manually, either way. But thank you, Anthony, as always, for the feedback. Sorry that these paragraphs, if you will, got missed on the original Fly Chat episode, but wanted to make up for that. So yeah, just food for thought out there to get that out there and please accept my sincere apologies for those paragraphs being skipped. Hopefully we will not have any further technical or, I don't know, psychological difficulties. I have no idea how I missed those paragraphs. But either way, the next email missive you sent, I will make certain to comb through it. I will comb the desert and make certain that I don't end up saying, we ain't found shit. Yeah, I'm being corny for a second. Spaceballs reference there. But either way, thank you, as always, Anthony, for the feedback. Indeed, greatly appreciated. All right, so I talked about this on Flight Speed yesterday, and I talked a little bit about it on Threads because this weird DCEU revisionist history keeps popping up. And what it really signifies to me is that the Anti-Snyder Cult just can't let it go. Which is ironic to me, and I've brought this up before, about how, of all people, of all groups on this earth that would want to actually see the DCEU die, the Anti-Snyder Cult refuses to let it go, refuses to let it die. Like, if they just stopped talking about it, if they never referenced any of those movies again, if they never talked about Henry Cavill as Superman, if they never talked about Ben Affleck as Batman, if they never talked about BVS and how much it depressed them for days and they couldn't go to sleep and they felt like their dogs had been John Wicked, by Zack Snyder personally, right? Like, if they just put that out of their minds, if they just leave it in the past where it legitimately, objectively is, then talk about the DCEU would really be at a minimum. And they could ignore anything they didn't want to pay attention to. And that includes the trolls and the rage bots that are just posting to get a rise out of them. But the crazy thing about it is that the DCEU is being kept alive by these dipshits. And what I mean by this is what's happening is with all this Superman discourse, all the box office stuff especially, right? Because, and we'll talk about box office here in a little bit. That's the other thing I really want to talk about. But as Superman continues, it's now past $600 million. And the thing is, it's not going to pass Man of Steel. Gatesh Panda is still projecting, from boxofficeguru.com, he's still projecting 625, which will put it about 45, 50 million short, or around that number, of Man of Steel's global box office, right? For its entire run back in 2013. And so, the rage bots and the delusional Snyder cultists, the little circle jerk that they have, they're putting out all these memes, super woke and blah, 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 and the crying meme with David Cornswet and all that shit, because they're acting like the box office crown is like the ultimate thing. And they claim, like, when you call them out on their bullshit and when you remind them that they're acting exactly like the Anti-Snyder Cult, or like behaved towards them, like since 2013, they say, well, we're just doing to them what they did to us. Well, okay, congratulations. Harvey Dent, take him to church. You either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. They're the villain now. The little ones of them that exist, because they're doing the same thing that the rage bots are doing, the same thing that the pocket dimension monkeys that exist in real life are doing. But here's the thing. Because of all this chatter, because of all this nonsense from faceless, no avatar, 39 followers or less accounts, or ones that have, falsified pictures, whether it's an AI picture or a picture of somebody else that's stolen from social media, whatever it is, right? Like all these dummy bullshit ass accounts that don't have any followings, right? And no real audiences or power whatsoever. Because of that, the Anti-Snyder Cult feels compelled to respond. And they have felt like victims for the last number of years. Now, listen, I will not excuse the toxicity that has been thrown their way for the last 9 years or so, like in response to this. Actually longer, or not longer, but shorter than that, right? Because the toxicity started from the anti-Snyder cult. It's certainly ramped up in 2016 with BVS. And the whole "we don't negotiate with terrorists" bullshit from assholes like Jamal Igle and other comic creators that just really took a disgusting tone towards the fandom that actually appreciated those films, right? Again, they act like Zack Snyder John Wicked their dog. They really do. But either way, so they have been feeling attacked and bullied, and just all manner of disgusting stuff has been hurled at them online. And while that is true, I mean, they could have ignored it and blocked it at any point in time, just like they tell us to ignore and block them, right? But they are just as culty. They are just as toxic on that side of it, right? So now, when they see the toxicity still, being hurled at Superman, being hurled at James Gunn, they feel compelled to respond. And so that's why this new revisionist history about the DCEU is happening. Now, I mentioned a moron that I responded to and immediately deleted, but then I also posted a response about it on Threads the other day, which I talked about on Flight Speed. But there's another thing that came up today that I posted on Threads, and this was an article that I found on Screen Rant. And mind you, this article came up, like how when you open a Google page and there's suggested articles there, like, hey, maybe you'd be interested in this. That's how I found this headline. And I see this headline, it's about Blue Beetle. And it intrigues me because I haven't heard anything with respect to Blue Beetle. We talked about that. James Gunn, a couple years ago, had talked about Joel Maraduena was going to be Blue Beetle in the DCU. And at the time, all of us fans were trying to reason, okay, well, I wonder how he's going to fit that in. What's he going to be able to take from the movie and bring over to his? Now it seems pretty clear what's going to happen, and that's really what this particular article is about, or at least the bits of it that I thought were important. But the headline for this article says, James Gunn confirms Zack Snyder's DCEU hero joining DCU after Peacemaker retcon. Okay. Before dealing with the bullshittery of that title, let me just read the important part, right? The crux of this piece, which is, it's a Screen Rant piece, so take it with a grain of salt unless it's written from one or two other writers or three writers really that I follow at all. Stephen Colbert, Andrew Dyson, Andy Beckbach, and I don't even know if Dice or Colbert are still working or writing for them. I haven't talked to them in a while, but either way. So this thing says, Joel Maraduena's Blue Beetle will be receiving a treatment similar to Peacemaker, according to James Gunn, who reiterated that the character will indeed appear in the new DCU via Rotten Tomatoes. Considering the movie arrived post-Gunn's DCU announcement, even though it was one of the last remnants of Zack Snyder's DCEU, like Peacemaker, it had barely any direct ties to the now-defunct universe. This further makes the transition from the DCEU to the DCU very easy for Maraduena's Jaime Reyes, as Gunn noted. Quote, Peacemaker, there's hardly anything else that you need to change for him. He can slide very easily into the DCU. Same with Blue Beetle. So I guess that's the reference, right? That's what Gunn said. And apparently he said this to Rotten Tomatoes, or this is the source of this is Rotten Tomatoes. All right, fine. So that's his mention. And now, we can see this very clearly with respect to, what just happened with Peacemaker. And again, all the people that are claiming it's this massive retcon, no, it is not. It is not a retcon because we're seeing a completely different universe. We saw a version of events that happened at the end of season 1 of Peacemaker similarly in the DCU with the subtle change, the slight change of Justice Gang replacing Justice League for obvious reasons. But part of the anti-Snyder cult's response to the trolls that are pissing them off, that they're getting all butthurt over, that they can't ignore and push aside, was to tell the Snyder cult, hey, the Snyderverse has been erased. Bullshit. It objectively has not been erased, because I can still go over to my shelf right now and look at my Man of Steel 4K, look at my Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice Ultimate Edition 4K, look at my Zack Snyder's Justice League 4K Steelbook. All of those still exist. They didn't evaporate. No one came to my home. No Men in Black showed up at my home with a neuralizer to erase the, Zack Snyder or the DCEU or the Snyderverse from my mind. No, most certainly not. In fact, I have all 15 DCEU movies in physical form and in digital form. They're all here. They're all right here. Amazingly, the Peacemaker change did nothing to change any of that whatsoever. So, but this is what they were doing. And this is what they're doing now. This is how the Anti-Snyder Cult is showing their ass. And this is why anybody that still tries to tell me that there is no Anti-Snyder Cult, you're full of shit. Because they're all over the place now. And they're acting just as toxically as the Snyder Cult is. And they're trying to weaponize shit. Right? Now that the DCU is fully functional, what did I say? What did we all say? They're going to weaponize Superman against us. And they've tried their damnedest to do that. They really have. And yet the trolls and the rage bots still get to them with this box office shit, that they still feel the need to be snarky and stoop to their level, and this is part of that, right? But here's the thing. Part of that snarkiness and part of those attacks against the Snyder Cult involves lying now. Involves revisionist history, because now they're saying that, one, that we had our chance, that the DCEU had its chance and the fans never supported it, and two, they're calling it Zack Snyder's DCEU. What is that? What the hell is Zack Snyder's DCEU? Did that ever exist? Has that ever even remotely existed? Was Zack Snyder ever put in charge of DC Films? No. No, he was not. That's a rhetorical question. But you all know that already. I'm not reiterating anything that you don't already know. They followed his blueprint for a bit. They let him make Man of Steel unencumbered because Christopher Nolan protected him as an executive producer. And then when it came to Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, they told him to cut a half an hour out of the movie so they get more screen times. A half an hour that really screwed with the movie's pacing and messed up a number of the subplots, where if they had just left that hour in at 3 hours and 2 minutes, which is only about 5 or 6 minutes more than The Batman, right? If they just left that in, then who knows what the tomato meter score on the Hell site would have been for that particular movie, and who knows how much it would have made. We'll never officially know, but there's definitely a part of me that thinks $1 billion is in the cards had the ultimate edition of that movie been released instead of the truncated version that we got in theatrical form, right? And then after that, after those changes, I mean, that's when they ordered the 6 weeks of reshoots for David Ayer Suicide Squad and had the trailer company mangle that movie. They let Patty Jenkins pretty much, go where she was going to go, right? Because they said, well, it's Wonder Woman, maybe she's going to do something different. But even then, we were still getting Scooper Madness telling us, oh, it's unwatchable and they don't like it, da-da-da-da. We were getting lies from Scooper Madness about that movie even, and it did really well. But the whole Justice League disaster ruined and destroyed everything. So Zack Snyder was never in charge of the DCEU. And furthermore, nothing with respect to the DCEU after Aquaman was part of his original plan. Nothing. So the term Zack Snyder's DCEU is false. It's a fallacy. He made 3 movies: Man of Steel, Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice Ultimate Edition, and Zack Snyder's Justice League. Not even Justice League. He did not make that. That was a mangled, whitewashed, bastardized, toxic piece of shit that Joss Whedon, creepy-ass Joss Whedon, was hired to turn into a lazy, paint-by-numbers Avengers clone that even the general audience didn't dig. They spent over $300 million on it. It was the first massive bomb, and still probably the biggest bomb in the DCEU. Probably even bigger than all the bombs in the Walter Hamada era. But that's the name that these anti-Snyder cultists keep forgetting. And they're conveniently forgetting it. And, the Snyder cultists are forgetting it as well. But the Walter Hamada era of the DCEU, right? Everything post-Aquaman. Because Aquaman, of course, was already fully filmed before he took over DC Films, right? Like, they were done filming, I want to say, late November or early December of 2017, right? And Hamada took over in January of 2018. After, the Justice League disaster got Berg and Johns and Diane Nelson and everybody else fired, right? And Tsujihara, I think, also went out with that as well, as he should have for many other disgusting reasons. But Aquaman doesn't count under Walter Hamada's purview because it was in post-production for the entirety of his run. Juan had already shot everything that he shot in that regard, right? And that movie's $1 billion that it made is largely due to its direct connection to the previous films, to Zack Snyder's films, right? Because the thing is, Zack Snyder made his 3 films, and then Suicide Squad, Wonder Woman, and Aquaman were connected to them directly, and that's it. Everything else after that, both Shazam movies, Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn, Black Adam for certain, regardless of what you think, regardless of the Henry Cavill credit scene, right? We're not talking about our own perception of this, because I also had to I talked to one mutual, because I posted this on Threads, right? And a mutual, he didn't completely disagree with what I was saying, but he did say that technically he would consider Wonder Woman 1984 as part of the Snyderverse, since Patty Jenkins has made it absolutely clear that she considers Zack Snyder's Justice League canon, not Justice League, and setting the movie in 1984 doesn't really break any continuity with Snyder's vision. He says, I admit it's somewhat thin, a somewhat thin thread, but it is there. This is from an account, this is from a mutual, the underscored tales that really matter. And what I said to him was, the problem is that it deviated from the original plan. The first Wonder Woman film was actually part of Zack's original plan. Doesn't matter what Patty considers canon, her sequel came after Zack left and the original plan was destroyed. And that's the crux here, guys. It's not about what we think is canon. It's not about what we consider to be connected or not, deviate, or not break continuity, rather. Like, it doesn't matter what we think of it. What matters is what actually was put into practice, what actually was created. Everything in the DCEU from Shazam on was not connected, was not part of the original plan. That includes Wonder Woman 1984. That includes The Flash. Because remember, 4 different directors, a couple different screenwriters right before finally settling on that. And even though I enjoy that movie, and I want to make it clear, I still enjoy the DCEU for what it is. But acting like Zack Snyder's DCEU encompasses Shazam and Blue Beetle and Black Adam and Wonder Woman 1984 and The Flash and everything after that, no, absolutely not. His original plan for the DCEU ended with Aquaman. Game over at that point. That's objective fact. Why? Because Aquaman, as I said, was in the can around the time, like it was filming, around the time that he was still a part of, the post-production process for Justice League after he had filmed Justice League. And then he steps down in the middle of that production while Aquaman is in the middle of its production and filming. And then Aquaman ends its filming as Justice League is coming out. But James Wan filmed a movie, and he's another filmmaker that also considers the Snyderverse to be canon. But that film precedes Walter Hamada taking over DC Films. The second Walter Hamada took over DC Films, any and everything that was part of the DCEU under his purview was not connected to the original plan, and Zack Snyder has shit to do with it. Starting with Shazam, since that was a New Line film, and Walter Hamada came over from New Line. So this idea that this revisionist history about the DCEU having its chance and fans didn't support it, bullshit. Most certainly we supported it through its first 4 films to the tune of $3 billion, and then Warner Brothers pulled the rug out from under us with Justice League and that nonsense, and burned the Snyder fans, created the Snyder Cult, in addition to the Anti-Snyder Cult and their bullying and their badgering and their bullshit about we don't negotiate with terrorists, that nonsense. I will never forget that shit from Jamal Agel, that dude, seriously. Not a good person, not a good human being at all, among other comic creators that also were saying ridiculous shit like that, right? Like, all of that created the Snyder Cult, okay? Not this unwavering desire to see, and this unwavering loyalty towards Zack Snyder's filmmaking. It was the bullying. The bullying created it. The bullying and the fact that Warner Brothers listened to the bullies. That's what created it, right? And so you get the rug pulled out from under us, and then you make a movie, you put a movie out there, you spend over $300 million shooting a movie twice, you put the bastardized, whitewashed, toxic version out there, the general audience knows how disingenuous and boring it is, so they don't go see it. And it ends up being a huge bomb, and that's when you change course massively. But you don't screw with Aquaman because that's already in post-production. That's already going. You got 13 months of that ahead of you. So you're hanging your hat on that, carrying the torch. And we all saw it because Momoa was in it, and we knew it was connected to the previous plan that Zack had. That was it. That was why we saw it. Momoa was the big star vehicle. It made that $1 billion. And then after that, there was no plan whatsoever for the rest of the DCEU. Walter Hamada and Toby Emmerich had one objective and one objective only. Don't hearken back to the Snyder films. Ignore and dismiss the Snyder films as much as possible. They had no plan for where anything was going whatsoever, right? With respect to Shazam, with respect to Birds of Prey, with respect to Wonder Woman 1984, with respect to the hiring James Gunn to do the Suicide Squad, and that de facto became, Walter Hamada hiring his replacement in that regard, right? How about that? But the fact of the matter is that part of the DCEU, the Hamada era, is so loosely put together and so aimless that it's extremely easy for James Gunn to go, okay, I'm bringing Suicide Squad in, I'm bringing the Suicide Squad in, I'm bringing Peacemaker in, and I'm bringing Blue Beetle in. Because what are they connected to? Nothing. There's nothing directly in Zack Snyder's original plan that they are directly connected to. And there's no canon that he has to worry about. He can largely, like, if you go back and rewatch the Suicide Squad, and he's even said this. Gunn has even said this. Go back and rewatch the Suicide Squad. Certainly season 1 of Peacemaker and Blue Beetle and all of those. Like what prior elements do they connect to, right? It's not like The Flash where Batfleck is in The Flash, right? Or where it directly ties into Man of Steel, but again, not part of the original plan. It was just this, this afterthought where they're like, okay, well, we got to do something. We got to connect it. This is the swan song. It turned into the swan song, if you will, right? And they were trying to create connective threads, but it didn't do that, right? Like, none of what Gunn is bringing in does that. So this idea that it's so beholden and like, oh, well, you're making these massive changes. No, it's not necessary. So Blue Beetle is going to be easy to bring into it because it was never Zack Snyder's DCEU, not in its entirety. Just that original plan up to Aquaman in that regard. That was it. Rest of it, completely aimless and just in all manner of directions. Remember, that's why Batgirl got shelved and written off, because they were going to go in a particular direction where they were going to make Keaton the DCEU Batman, right? And even I denied, no, they're not doing that. No, they pretty much were. We'd heard about them shooting a sequence in Aquaman of the Lost Kingdom for that. At one point, they shot it with Affleck. We heard another rumor that they shot it with Keaton. I don't even know how that actually happened, but they were hodgepodging shit. That's all it was. They were hodgepodging shit for the last 9 movies of that franchise, and that is absolutely has nothing to do with Zack Snyder's original plan. So this idea that we're calling it Zack Snyder's DCEU and that we had a chance to support it and that we were never burned by any of the shit that happened early on, bullshit. Complete revisionist bullshit. And it's lies that the Anti-Snyder Cult is spewing because the toxic rage bots and trolls are getting to them. Again, they've always gotten to them and they can't ignore them. Just the same as they want us to ignore their nonsense, they can't ignore the other nonsense. That's why those two cults are born for each other, made for each other, and they deserve the same spot in hell together to rot, while the rest of us move forward and enjoy the future of the DCU that will incorporate elements of the Suicide Squad and hopefully characters from the Suicide Squad, James Gunn's The Suicide Squad, in addition to Peacemaker, which doesn't need to redo Season 1 because, again, Season 1 is DCEU, not DCU, so no, millions of dollars do not need to be wasted to redo that whatsoever. James Gunn has said so. Season 2, which is fully DCU compliant because it is in the DCU, and Blue Beetle, who for all intents and purposes, as far as we're concerned, I mean, we can just go ahead and call that a DCU movie, right? Because I certainly can't think of any connective tissue like, oh, was there anything mentioned whatsoever in Blue Beetle that, has to be dealt with? Like, there's no, like, Justice League references, maybe George Lopez's character says something about the Justice League and I gotta change that. Little things, whatever, doesn't matter, right? Because it's a DCEU film, they can just bring everybody over and say, here, the DCU version is pretty much the same, just like they're doing with Peacemaker. Really easy peasy, because there's not a whole lot to connect it to. Hence, all the more reason, objectively so, why it was never Zack Snyder's DCEU and why it isn't Zack Snyder's DCEU. Screen Rant, that is lazy journalism at its finest, to come up with that stupid-ass reductive tone, this revisionist tone, this revisionist term, rather, if you will. It's nonsense. And whatever, it's just one more proof that these people, this anti-Snyder cult, won't let the DCEU die. Why are we talking about the DCEU hot and heavy? We are well into the DCU. The DCU has launched. We got Creature Commandos, we got Superman, and we're about to get the second episode of Peacemaker fully entrenched in the DCU. And we're still talking this much about the DCEU. Why? For what purpose? Because they won't let it go. Any of the rest of us would. We're willing to talk about Peacemaker. We're willing to talk about Superman. We're willing to move forward in that discussion. They're not. Because they just have to stick it to the trolls. They just have to stick it to the people that have made them butthurt over the last however many years with all the shit online, right? They don't like, they can dish out the toxicity, but they can't take it, right? They're made for each other, both of those stupid ass cults. Whatever. It is what it is. But just wanted to highlight that for a bit, because wow, we're not rewriting history. We are not revisioning what the history was about the DCEU and how it died and when it died. The DCEU objectively, officially died as far as the original plan is concerned on November 17th, 2017, when Justice League was released. That's when it died. Everything after that, the only movie after that, Aquaman. After that, everything under the Walter Hamada era, bullshit. Had nothing to do with the original plan. Period. And I know that anybody listening to this show knows this, but everybody else, out there trying to spout some other nonsense, because it'll make them feel better as they stick it to the trolls. Yeah, no, not at all. You're just making yourselves look like uneducated simpletons, but it is what it is. So more people to block and more people to move on from. All right, real quick, here was the box office thing that I wanted to mention, because Superman obviously passed 600 million this past weekend, and it's been a really interesting trajectory box office wise for that film, because all of the consternation and all the worry about, well, it was released digitally too soon and now it's going to affect the box office. Well, it really hasn't seemed to, because that movie released digitally on what date, right? What was the date for that again? August 15th? Yeah, that was the digital release for Superman, August 15th. Now, the day before that, domestically speaking, here in the U.S., it made $880.5 thousand on a Thursday night, on Thursday, August 14th, right? The day of the digital release on August 15th, 1.4 million. Saturday, August 16th, 2.2 million. And then Sunday, August 17th, 1.6 million. So it actually had a 63% bump on Friday and a 53.4% bump on Saturday. This is per Box Office Mojo. Go look at the numbers if you don't believe me. And then it had a 26.4% Sunday to Sunday drop on the 17th. But still, it goes from 880,000 on Thursday to 1.4 million on Friday, 2.2 million on Saturday, and 1.6 million on Sunday, the weekend it was released digitally, right? And then the following week after that, right? 600 grand on Monday the 18th, 863 grand on Tuesday the 19th, 651 grand on Wednesday the 20th. I'm going somewhere with this, bear with me. $539,000 on Thursday the 21st, and then up to $955,000 on August 22nd. So this is a week after the digital release. It gets back up close to $1 million, and then Saturday the 23rd, it hits 1.4 million. That's another 53.9% bump. And then $985,000 Sunday the 24th, $348,000 on August 25th, just yesterday, Monday. So we're talking about 605.3 million worldwide that this movie has made. It has blown apart Man of Steel's number domestically. And yes, it's going to finish behind Man of Steel globally. But here's the deal. First of all, the digital release clearly didn't hurt it, because people are still going to see it in theaters, right? But there was a stat that Kitesh Panda posted the other day that I think is very telling and just supports everything that I've been saying and that many others have been saying with respect to how we need to reframe the box office conversation post-2020, and that is this. Yesterday, he posted on BLUESKY what he called a comprehensive list of Hollywood movies which managed to gross over $50 million at China box office this year. Here's the list. Here are all of the movies from Hollywood, right? All of the domestically made movies in Hollywood that grossed over $50 million in China this year. Number 1, Jurassic World Rebirth, $78.5 million. Number 2, Mission Impossible Final Reckoning, made $64.5 million over in China. Number 3, F1 the movie, made $59.2 million in China. And that's it. That is it. No other Hollywood movies have made more than $50 million at the China box office this year. That's it, right? What movies didn't I name? I didn't name Lilo and Stitch. I didn't name How to Train Your Dragon. I didn't name Thunderbolts. I didn't name Final Destination. And I certainly didn't name either Superman or Fantastic Four. Guys, seriously, when we're having the box office discussions, this is why domestic has now become the forefront with respect to our conversations. China has changed. China has changed its mind with respect to Hollywood films. Do you know that the highest grossing animated film of all time is a movie that just released in the States called Ne Zha 2? And you know how much money that movie has made globally? $2.1 billion. Now guess how much of that came from the United States? 22.4 million. This is a crazy domestic international split. In fact, I'm not even entirely certain how this trends out, but this is 1%. 1% of Ne Zha 2's worldwide gross comes from the United States. 22.4 million. China did this all on their own, right? 87.4% of its gross, $1.8 billion, is international. But this is largely China. This movie made $1.8 billion in China alone. It's the highest grossing animated movie of all time, and it's the highest grossing movie of the year, and it has almost nothing to do with American audiences, has almost nothing to do with any of our dollars whatsoever. This is what China is focusing on. Their own product, their own movies, their own films. They have largely abandoned American cinema in general. I mean, certainly comic book movies, right? I mean, where's Fantastic Four or Superman right now as far as China numbers? Where are those at? As of the time of this episode, Fantastic Four First Steps has made $5.5 million in China. Superman, $8.9 million in China. So you can sit there and go, oh, well, there's clearly an issue. They've got to fix that. No, China has decided, screw Hollywood. It's certainly the superhero movies, right? They're not going to see the superhero films. But they're also not seeing a whole lot of other American fare in general, right? Only 3 Hollywood movies making over $50 million this year in China. Only 3. That used to be a regular occurrence where they would make in the hundreds of millions, right? And I talked about Jurassic World Rebirth and how that the first Jurassic World movie made what? Over $200 million, like 228, almost $250 million over in China. And it's been progressively getting less and less with each film, right? Fallen Kingdom made less than that. Dominion made less than that. And now this new one, Rebirth, making even less than that, right? This is just how the market has changed. This is just what they're doing. And this is why for years people have talked about how we need to stop judging so much on international box office, stop looking so much at global and focus more on domestic in terms of these film successes, because the international market can change on a dime. And it has. It most certainly has, right? But beyond that, in addition to the China market changing, and that's a big deal. The reason I bring up China so much is because that's the market that keeps pushing the United States to be number one, right? And there have been a couple of years in the last 5 or 6 since COVID started that they have been number one at the box office as far as the market share, right? And they might be number one this year. Who knows, right? They're the chief competition with respect to movie making dollars. So they're the big one, right? Look, I know UK and Mexico and all the other countries are out there. Yes, most certainly. But China's the big one. And they were the ones that were funding. I mean, a lot of Marvel's $1 billion success over the strength of the MCU did come from China with respect to international dollars, right? Same with Star Wars, even with DC films, right? Like that was a big deal with respect to that. There's only a couple of films like maybe No Way Home and a few others in the MCU that didn't need a ton of money from China in order to break their records box office wise. But beyond that, I also wanted to call attention to this Reddit post that I found. And yeah, I know I'm about to source a Reddit post, but here's the thing. Unlike certain idiots, members of Scooper Madness, I don't keep arguing with nonsensical people on Reddit. I just stopped. I still have my Reddit account, but I don't, engage a whole lot. But I did see something come across my way. This was a post in the Marvel Studios subreddit titled, "Marvel Didn't Die After Endgame. Here's What's Actually Going On." And I want to read this because, again, it's crazy how things have come full circle in terms of how the MCU is perceived right now compared to how DC was perceived for a number of years. It's really flip-flopped. I mean, think about it. Fantastic Four First Steps came out 2 weeks after Superman. The discussion is still about Superman. The discussion largely is still about the DCU and James Gunn, right? Even if it's people being irrationally pissed off that they watched Peacemaker with their kids, which I don't buy that there are that many people that were stupid enough to watch Peacemaker with their kids, but it's not James Gunn's responsibility to parent their children. He warned you that it wasn't going to be the same thing as Superman. It's your own damn fault if you decided to watch Peacemaker with your kids. Be a better parent. Shield your kids from that shit. The DCU is going to have different tones, even when it's from the same creator, right? All the people that can't wait to see different stuff from James Gunn, it's because they know that he can be irreverent, and now they know he can do his film like Superman, right? They didn't know that before. Many people still think he's being irreverent, but it's still not to the level of Peacemaker. It's like, oh, he toned it down for that, right? Point is, it's going to have different tones. Whatever. That's what the conversation still is about. I don't hear a whole lot of people talking at all about Fantastic Four First Steps. I hear more rumors about what's going on with Doomsday and Spider-Man Brand New Day than I hear about anything with Fantastic Four First Steps, which is unfortunate because it's a good movie. And Gatesh still thinks that it's going to get to 525 million worldwide globally as far as the box office. Right now, it's just shy of 500 million. It's at 491 worldwide globally, right? And let's see, how has it been trending with respect to its dates? Let's take a look here real quick. It's still posting numbers in the millions, right? Like the weekend of Superman's digital release It did 2.4 million on that Friday, almost 2.5 million, 3.8 million on August 16th. That was a Saturday. 2.7 million on that Sunday. 1.3 million on Tuesday the 19th. 1.5 million this past Friday. 2.6 million on Saturday. It's still going. Okay, it's going to get over. It's going to cross $500 million, and it's probably going to get to that 525 goal that he's talking about. But while everybody else is pouring dirt on the grave of the MCU, while a lot of people are, let's read this Reddit post from Florin P93 titled "Marvel Didn't Die After Endgame. Here's What's Actually Going On." They say, I keep seeing people say Marvel has been failing or flopping since Avengers Endgame in 2019. Yeah, it's true, the vibe has shifted and the cultural dominance isn't the same. No, it is not. But the MCU is dead narrative really misses a lot of context. Here is the bigger picture. Number one, the post-COVID box office isn't the same beast. Global box office hasn't returned to 2010's levels. Endgame came at the peak of Marvel and peak theatrical attendance. Going to the movies is more expensive now, tickets plus concessions, and for many people, streaming is cheaper and more convenient. The theatrical window is shorter, 60 to 90 days, so a lot of people just wait. Internationally, China no longer guarantees a $200 to $300 million boost for Marvel. Nationalist taste plus censorship plus strong local films have cut that market significantly. So when you look at raw box office and say flop, you're comparing 2022 to 2025 to a pre-pandemic market that doesn't exist anymore. And he's got sources for this. He actually posted an article, Alpi says superhero movies no longer dominate, and an AP article about Disney crossing $3 billion at the 2025 box office, right? So he's got sources, his own sources on this. But everything I just read in that first bullet point is no different than anything I've already said, right? With the exception of the window, the theatrical window being shorter. I haven't really brought that up, but it is true, right? But here's his second bullet point. He says Marvel is still pulling huge engagement on Disney+. Even films that underperform theatrically end up making money when they hit Disney+. Some rough numbers, based on Nielsen data, ARPU, which stands for Average Revenue Per User, and subscriber reports. WandaVision and Loki in 2021, tens of millions of new subs, 4.4 billion annualized uplift. That's apparently from Fool.com. Black Widow 2021, 67 million PVOD opening weekend, deadline plus retention value. Remember, ScarJo took them to court on that one. They settled outside of court with respect to that because of the whole Premier Access deal. Shang-Chi and Eternals, 5 million incremental subs, 480 million. Okay. Doctor Strange 2, Thor 4, Black Panther 2. 12 million subs combined, 1.15 billion uplift. Quantumania 2023, weak. Less than 300 million in streaming value. Guardians Volume 3, 800 million to a billion. Deadpool and Wolverine added 8 million subs, 770 million. Apparently that's sourced from Reuters. The Marvels 2024, 559 minutes streamed week 1. Nielsen via Screen Rant, 3.4 million to 20 million global value in 2 to 3 months. Captain America Brave New World, 750 million minutes week 1, Nielsen via the direct. 4.4 million to 26 million global value, but those are early numbers, not the actual figures yet, he says. Thunderbolts, no numbers just yet, but it will most likely fall in line with the others. Keep in mind, he says, that the numbers for each movies are amounts that have been added to the already Disney Plus earnings and don't factor in retention of already existing subs. That's billions in revenue from Disney Plus alone and doesn't include merch, licensing, or parks. Now, the only issue that I have with that particular bullet point is all that data is self-reported. All that is coming directly from Disney. We still don't have a third-party source that actually corroborates that data, so it's just Disney saying, this is what we've got. And I know it's got Reuters and it's got Nielsen, but all of it is still wild, wild west, right? Like all of it is still, it's not as solvent as the box office. It's not as solvent as what we even have for traditional TV Nielsen ratings and ComScore and RentTrack and whatnot. It's a good amount of data to follow, but it still gets a little bit more complicated. But he's basically trying to indicate that the Disney Plus engagement is still there for all of these movies, so it proves that Marvel doesn't die. And really, I don't need that data. I can just look at the conversation, right? When Captain America Brave New World popped up on Disney Plus, all of a sudden people were talking about it again. Same would go for Thunderbolts. Same will probably go for Fantastic Four First Steps, to be honest with you. That's all I need to see as far as social engagement is concerned. And it also goes back to what he said in the previous point about how there are people that are just going to wait until it's on Disney Plus before they see it. I know some people that are doing that. I know some people that I know people that are waiting for Superman to hit HBO Max, and they'll be waiting a little bit longer. But there are definitely people that do that for economical reasons or for time reasons, no doubt about it. His third point: superhero fatigue is real, but failure is overstated. Now, of course, you know how I feel about superhero fatigue, but he says Marvel's issue was overproduction. Too many shows diluted the brand. Disney's already scaling back 2 to 3 films and a couple of shows per year, they say. Hits like Deadpool and Wolverine, over $1.08 billion at the box office, biggest R-rated movie ever, and Fantastic Four First Steps, near $500 million worldwide, big Disney Plus driver to come, prove audiences still show up when projects connect. Even weaker titles, the Marvels, Quantumania, still generate measurable Disney Plus revenue. He's still going off of those numbers that he had in the previous point. But no, I completely agree about overproduction. I've said that. That's the biggest thing that Marvel Studios needs to do, is scale back. Both them and DC need to scale back. Now, I trust James Gunn. I take him at his word, especially talking about how, there has been no rush to change the plan based on the fact that Spider-Man Brand New Day and Avengers Doomsday are coming out next year. If this had been still run by DC Films, they'd be talking about fast-tracking a Wonder Woman movie. We need to get something out there to compete with Avengers Doomsday and a Spider-Man film. James Gunn and Peter Safran are going, no, this is our plan. We're going with Supergirl and Clayface and lanterns on television. That's what we're doing, right? And they're sticking to that plan, and I appreciate that, and I respect them for that. That's how they're building DC Studios. That's how they're building the DCEU. They're not fast-tracking anything. They're going about their business with respect to their plan. And guess what? That's how it'll work, right? That's how it's going to succeed for them if it does succeed in that regard. But yeah, the overproduction, that's the real superhero fatigue. Too many options for the general audience to blow past and just pick the ones that they were going to see and skip all the others, right? It's largely what burned Marvel in the last number of years. So he says, 4, the bigger picture. The box office is smaller overall post-COVID. Streaming matters as much as theaters now. Marvel still makes up 20 to 25% of total Disney Plus demand. That's from Parrot Analytics. And Disney Plus subs, 127.8 million as of this month, August 2025, and surveys show 43% of subs say Marvel is their number one reason to keep it. That comes apparently from cordcutting.com. So while Marvel may no longer be hitting endgame highs, it's still one of the most profitable entertainment engines in the world. And he provided a too long didn't read version of this, which is Marvel isn't dead. Theaters shrank, streaming grew, and Disney Plus depends heavily on Marvel. Even so-called flops add tens or hundreds of millions in streaming revenue. And even if those movies don't pull in much in terms of new subs, they do help retain the subscriber base. The MCU is evolving, not dying. He did include this note at the bottom, which I'm glad he did. He said, note, I used AI to help me structure this post so it's clearer to read, but all of the data, sources, and research were collected by me without AI, and he did provide links. I will give them credit for that. So this is a linked piece that's in this Marvel Studios subreddit, and it's rather comprehensive. So I appreciate the work that this person did in going into that, and I largely agree with it. I get a little fuzzy with the streaming numbers and trying to talk about the viability and how it brings in those millions and billions, and that's an argument that I've made before with respect to streamers, but that's also part of why this conversation needs to evolve, because we're not talking about that. We're only still, Forbes and the others are only still talking about the box office. We're only still talking about theatrical. We're not talking about streaming. We're not talking about VOD. We're not talking about home sales. We're not talking about other sources of revenue, because at the end of the day, we're supposed to be talking about the viability of the franchises that we enjoy and whether or not we're going to see anymore. And if there's an argument out there that suggests it's not as viable, well, then we need more data to talk about the other revenue streams that it has that are more viable now than they were 10, 15, 20 years ago. Streaming is far more viable now. Video on demand is far more viable now, right? These are numbers that we need to know. And home sales, those are numbers that people have never really reported. I mean, they've been reported here and there with respect to certain films, but not by and large with respect to these franchises. So that's where the conversation needs to change overall. And I just think it's intriguing to find a post like this about Marvel Studios defending the MCU, defending Marvel Studios at this point. which who would have thought we'd ever be at that point? Again, it's still kind of wild, right? That the number one film, the number one superhero film of the year, as far as perception is concerned, is Superman. But we'll see. It'll be interesting to look at those numbers, right? See if somebody, like if this person or somebody else, sources the streaming numbers when it hits HBO Max. What are the video on demand numbers for it so far? I know a lot of people that have bought it. I know some people that have rented it, right? Like, honestly, like a number of you have in that regard, right? So be very interesting, but this is why the conversation around box office and the conversation around the financial viability of these franchises absolutely needs to change, because there's way more variables, and there's way the landscape is so different now compared to what it was pre 2020, pre COVID, right? And hey, we can either alter our perception on that and have a more nuanced and a more rational discourse about it, or we can keep pounding our heads against the wall and acting like, oh, it's all about this and it's all about that, and just be stubborn and look like morons and uneducated morons in that regard. And then we're like, why are they continuing to make this? Why are they continuing to make that? Well, because it's clearly profitable for them, and they're clearly moving forward with respect to what they're doing. So, yeah, just food for thought, guys. Food for thought with respect to the box office discussion. I know, I'm sure a number of you are probably tired of talking about box office, but it's not going to go away. And these other numbers and these other data points are things that we most certainly should be entering into the conversation going forward. And that, my friends, is officially going to do it for this particular episode of the Flightcast. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for supporting theflightcast.com. Greatly appreciate it. If you have any thoughts that you wish to share about anything that I talked about in this episode, if you want to talk about the other part of Anthony's feedback that I finally got a chance to read here on this particular episode, if you want to talk about the DCEU revisionist history and how the Anti-Snyder Cult won't let it go, won't let it die, and if you want to talk about the box office discussion and how it needs to evolve with respect to these franchises, and your thoughts on the Reddit posts and the China numbers and whatnot, you know where to find me on Threads and on Instagram at The Flightcast, on BLUESKY at Flightcast. You can comment on the posting for this episode at the Flightcast YouTube page. There's also the Flightcast Facebook page, and of course, I can be reached by email at ray@theflightcast.com. All right, take care, stay safe out there, have a great rest of the week, and I will see you all next time. Take it easy.